Hey guys, welcome back to my lab. This is going to be video 3 of the first lab, and in this video we're going to install and configure Active Directory domain services. We're going to promote a VM to be a domain controller and create a very basic group policy and some other little things like that. So, quick introduction, I guess. If you're not familiar, Active Directory is a really powerful way of managing computers and policies for those computers. So essentially, if you have, like, for managing users and computers, essentially if you have a bunch of computers on a network and you want to be able to manage those, like deploy the same sort of settings to those computers, you can use Active Directory and say that you have 10 employees and you want them to be able to log in into any computer. This would be the perfect use case. So as you remember, we've already created a firewall, we've created a management virtual machine, and I've now created a new machine called DC1, which stands for Domain Controller. I've opened up the server manager, but as you can see, since our network doesn't have DHCP yet, there's no network. So let's go ahead and, before we start anything, let's give this machine an IP address. Okay, and I'm just going to set my DNS to point to Google at the moment. Alright, I'm just going to confirm that it works. Okay, great. And before we start installing any roles, you'll probably want to change the host name of the computer. As you can see, this is currently not very good, so let's change that real quick. Okay, lab DC1. And it's just going to reboot real quick. Okay, so what we're going to do once it comes up, we're going to open up the server manager and start installing the Active Directory domain services role. So in server manager, once it's done loading, we're going to select add roles and features, role-based installation to our current server, and it's right here, Active Directory domain services, and we're just going to basically select all the defaults as usual. And if we need to restart, I'll just select that, and I'll pause the video while we wait for this to finish installing. Alright, it looks like that's finished. It's just telling us that we need to make some configuration. So let's close out of that window, and you'll see that there's a notification for promoting this server to a domain controller. So let's go ahead and go through that. Since this is going to be the first domain controller on this network, and we're going to select add a new forest. Alright, the forest is just going to be the root domain name, and in this case let's just make it lab.local. It's going to ask us for the directory services password. Make sure you remember this password, because if you want to promote other servers to domain controllers or remove any other servers or make any of those high-level changes, you're going to need to know this password. And the forest functional levels, since this is server 2012 R2, I'm going to keep it at that. We can't go higher, obviously, and there's no point in making it lower. So we're just going to stick with the defaults. And of course my password is not good. Alright, give me one sec. Alright, everything else is just going to be default. Alright. For the paths, we're going to leave that at default. Unless you have a specific purpose or you know what you're doing, I would suggest not touching this. It's going to give us a quick overview, and then it's just going to do the prereq check and do the install. So you're going to get a few warnings here by default, that's completely normal. I wouldn't worry about it. If there is an error, make sure that you resolve the error, but generally speaking, if you followed along or just doing this for the first time, it's just going to give you just a few errors and everything else is fine. So I'm going to hit install, and while that's happening, I'm going to pause the video. Alright, we're back. The Active Directory Domain Services has just completed installing, and I've just logged onto the computer. We can now open up Tools, and let's open up Active Directory Users and Computers. Okay, in this node, you'll be able to manage organizational units, which are basically containers for users and computers. So I'm going to go ahead and create, under our domain name, I'm going to create a new OU. An OU is an organizational unit, and I'm just going to call it lab. And under lab, I'm going to create another OU. I'm going to call it lab users, and then another OU for computers. It's going to be important for you to separate users and computers because group policies generally apply either to computers or to users, not by default to both. So I'm going to separate those out, and then I'm going to create a new user for myself because I don't want to be logging in as the local administrator. I'm going to call it just George. Alright, I'm going to give myself a password. I'm going to make sure I do not have to change the password at next logon, and since this is a lab, my password is not going to expire. As you can see, a common theme in my videos is that I always mess up the passwords. Alright, and then I'm going to go ahead and double click on myself. Under the Member Of tab, I'm going to make myself a domain admin. Okay, that means that I'll be an administrator to every computer or server that I log into. So I'm going to apply that change, and now every computer that is domain joined, I can use that user account to log in. So I'm going to go ahead and log off as the administrator and log in as myself. Alright, great. That works. So now we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to configure DNS. Essentially, when you install Active Directory Domain Services, it installs the DNS server role as well, because Active Directory does not work without DNS. So we're going to check the forward lookup zones. You can see there's our domain. Everything that we domain join is going to show up in here. You can see the domain controller already has an entry. So I'm going to go ahead and check the forwarders, DNS forwarders. I'm going to select the LabDC1 server, right click, and select forwarders. You can see 8.8.8.8 is already in here because that was the DNS of the computer before I promoted it to a domain controller. I'm going to edit this and select 8.8.4.4 as a backup, just to have two. Essentially, if you're not familiar with DNS, I would suggest you look up another video for that. This is not a video that explains DNS, but if you don't have any forwarders and if your root hints are not enabled, if you domain join a computer and try to access google.com and your domain controller doesn't know what google.com is, it's going to fail. With a forwarder, that allows it to forward the requests that it doesn't know out to these addresses, and if these don't know it, it'll use root hints. But we're going to have root hints enabled and forwarders enabled as well. So that's good. Then the next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to create a reverse lookup zone. A reverse lookup zone will be important for us if we're going to do an NS lookup. It's not configured by default, and it's pretty straightforward to configure. Just go through the properties, all defaults. I'm going to give it the IP address scheme that we're using, which is 192.168.2. And everything here is default. And in here, I'm now going to find my domain controller, and I'm going to go to properties and update the pointer record. A pointer record is the reverse lookup record. Okay, and I'll demonstrate how that works next. Now what I'm going to do is I've created another virtual machine for a client operating system, which is here, and I would like to show you how this works. But first things first, if I enable the internet, it's not going to get an IP address, right? So this could be in a different video, but I'd like to just add it here real quick. We're going to just do a quick configuration of DHCP server. So let's open up Server Manager. We're going to go back to Add Roles and Features. We're going to select the domain controller server, and we're going to install the DHCP server role. Everything is defaults again. If we have to restart, let's go ahead and do that. And let's select Install. And again, I'm going to pause the video while this installs, and I'll be right back. Alright, that just finished installation, and again we're seeing that we need to configure. So let's close and go to our notifications and complete the DHCP configuration. This step is pretty straightforward. It's just going to be all the defaults. I'm a domain admin, so I can use my credentials. That's pretty much it. So under Tools, we can now open DHCP. Okay, under DHCP, we're going to see our DHCP server, which is the domain controller. And under IPv4, since that's what I'm going to be using primarily, I'm going to create a new DHCP scope. What that means is that when a new computer connects to the network, it's going to look at the scope and it's going to connect to a pool of addresses that are inside of that scope. So let's select IPv4, right-click on it, and select New Scope. I'm going to give this, I'm just going to call it Default Scope. Oh my goodness, default scope, and the description is going to be 192.168.2.x, since the x is the value that's going to change. Start IP address will be 192.168.2.20 and 192.168.2.254. And I'm starting at 20 because I want the first 20 addresses to be available to me for anything that's, I guess, server related that I don't want having a DHCP address. Exclusions and delays, we're going to leave that blank. Lease duration is going to be blank. Or I'm sorry, it's going to be default. It's going to be the 8 hours, 8 days. Since, again, this is a lab, I don't really care. And DHCP options, we do want to configure those. So let's select Next. The default gateway, you should know what that is. It's 192.168.2.1 if you've been following along, or if this is your video or your network, give it the router address. Since we have a domain controller, we're going to make the parent domain as lab.local, and the DNS server that's going to be given out to the computers on the DHCP that are given DHCP addresses. The DNS address is going to be 192.168.2.3. This is going to be nice because every computer that joins automatically, I'll be able to domain join without having to manually change the DNS address. I'm not going to be adding a secondary here. You could if you have multiple DNS servers or domain controllers. In our case, I don't. So Win server, I'm going to leave that blank, and I do want to activate this scope. Okay, so now you could see that the scope is active, and you could see there's a little green check mark under IPv4, so the server is authorized and it's enabled. Alright, so let's go. Here's our client virtual machine. It's just running Windows 10. I'm going to go ahead and enable, and you can see that it's already picked up the domain name, right? So if we look at the properties, let's double click. You'll see the details, 192.168.2.20, which is the first address in my scope. And if I look at address leases, there it is. Very good. So now what we're going to do is we're going to join this computer to the domain. It's right here to change its domain or workgroup membership. Now I'm going to rename it Lab Client 1. And the domain is lab.local. I'm going to give it the username that I created. Alright, there we go. We've joined a computer to the domain. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and restart this. And while that's restarting, we'll pull up the domain controller again and we'll look at Active Directory users and computers. And you'll see under the computers, there it is, Lab Client 1. And now I'm going to go ahead and do a quick organizational task, and I'm going to put that computer into the OU for computers. Alright, so now that I have a new domain joined computer, what I can do is I can select other user, I can type in my username and my password, and now I've signed into a computer, a different computer with my same credentials. This is kind of the benefit, or this is the benefit of using Active Directory. We have centralized management of users and computers. And I'm going to show you one more thing that's really neat about Active Directory, and that's group policy. Group policy is a pretty basic thing. It's just applying settings to all the computers that we specify. But there are a lot of settings. And when you're looking at group policy at first, it could be overwhelming, but just give it time and eventually you'll learn the ins and outs and you'll be familiar. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a very basic group policy for mapped drives. So let's say I want all my users who sign into the domain, to a domain account, to have a shared drive so they can all share files. Okay, let's go ahead and first of all create that share. I don't have a lot of space here, but that doesn't matter. This is just going to be a demonstration. I'm going to create a new folder under the root of the C drive. And again, this is all just a demonstration. You don't have to do it like this. I'm going to share it. I'm going to give everyone share permission, then specify more advanced permissions under the security NTFS permission. So I'm going to disable inheritance. I'm going to remove all objects. I'm going to give system full control. I like to do that in case there's some app that needs access. I've had trouble with Dropbox in the past, where Dropbox wasn't able to scan a folder, or I apologize, not Dropbox, it was CrashPlan, and allowing system access to the folder, CrashPlan was able to access it. And now I'm going to give domain users, which is the default group that all domain users are a part of, I'm going to give them full control. I'm not creating any security groups because this is just a basic demonstration. Alright, good. And in this, I'm just going to create a text file and save that file. And now we should be able to access it by going to labdc1 share. There it is. So I'm going to copy this path. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the group policy management console. I'm going to expand our domain, and I'm going to go ahead and drop this domain under the users OU. The mapped drives group policy is a user setting. It's not a computer setting, so we need to make sure that we add that GPO to the OU that contains the users. So I'm going to select create a GPO in this domain and link it here. We're going to call this one mapped drives. This is just telling you that the changes that you make to the GPO here are global to all of the group policy GPOs that are for mapped drives. Essentially, I guess what that means is creating a group policy here creates the object here, and if you link it somewhere else, that will change there too, since the same group policy gets linked in multiple places if that's how you want to do it. So I apologize if that doesn't make sense. I can review the video and make sure that makes sense. So I'll right click on this and select edit, and you can see that there's a computer configuration and a user configuration. We're going to expand users, preferences, and window settings. And here's the setting for drive maps. I'm going to right click in the open area and select a new mapped drive. The location is going to be share. The location is going to be the network location. I'm going to label this as shared. I'm going to tell it to use the S letter for shared drive. Alright, apply. Very good. So that's there, that's applied. Now what I'm going to do on this computer is sign out. Sign back in. And you can see the shared drive shows up automatically. I'm going to close out of a few things here. We could try on this machine. You could see that the drive is not there. Let's do a group policy update. And you can see there it is. There's the shared drive. And you can see that if I make a new folder on this computer, there you go. It's automatically there on that folder. So in a nutshell, that's how you configure Active Directory. That's how you configure DNS, DHCP, and how to create a basic group policy object. I wanted to show one more thing that we set up in the beginning of the video. We set up the reverse lookup zone, and I wanted to show you exactly why we did that. When you're on a different computer, or on any computer really that's on part of the domain, part of that DNS server, we can ping, right? So we can do a ping lab DC1, right? And when we do a ping, we know the name, for example, in this case, and ping gives us the IP address. Now, what if you were troubleshooting something, you're going through some logs, and you're getting a host name? So you only know sorry, not the host name, you know the IP address. So let's say you just have 192.168.2.3, and you have no tools at your disposal to figure out what the host name of that is. A host name would maybe, in this case, help you figure out how to solve the problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a tool called NS lookup, and you could see since we configured the reverse lookup zone, the server is coming up correctly. If this was not here, this would be unknown. And we can replicate that by essentially stopping the DNS server. So if we launch NSLookup, you're going to see it's going to take a little longer, and it looks like this unknown. And all the NSLookup entries are going to fail. So I'm going to go ahead and restart that DNS server. And when we do an NSLookup, you could see that the DNS server shows up. And now let's say I know the IP address. I can type in 192.168.2.3, and that's going to give me the full host name. Or I know this IP address, lab client 1. That's essentially why NSLookup is, that's what NSLookup does, and that's why it's important to have a reverse lookup zone.